I mean, Ned Rorem was famously said that composers see music from the inside out, musicologists from the outside in.
Yeah.
And I think there's a great deal of that. It's very hard to psychoanalyze yourself as an artist, I think, to actually understand how it's happening. But a musicologist can do that.
He writes music for himself, I assume, and hopes that people will love it, and people do just love it. So it is. I don't know if he feels the urge then to explore serialism or cubism or any other isms. I think he wants to be Ian Venables and write the sort of music that Ian Venables would like. But I could not explain how it is that he has arrived at this position of being, one of this country's most famous song composers, living song composers, and most popular living song composers today.
The first time I heard his music, it was some songs. I can't remember which ones now, but it would have been about 2016, 2017. And he struck me immediately as being in the league of Gustav Holst, who I thought was, until I heard his songs, I thought were the best art songs ever written by an English composer. There's some very good Vaughan Williams songs, and I know there are people who make a strong case for Gerald Finzi and John Ireland, but I've always thought Holst was the master of writing English art songs. And when I heard Ian, Ian's not derivative, although he's obviously very much in that English tradition of art song writing. But I thought, gosh, this is in Holst's league, and I've always struggled since then, and it's a good struggle to have, to differentiate Ian as a writer of song from Holst in that way.
I think it's what he does is time stands still when you're listening to his music.
But if the grave rent and the stone rolled by, at the right hand of majesty on high you sit, and sitting so remember yet your tears, your agony, your bloody sweat, your cross and passion, and the life you gave. Hither out of heaven, and see, I save.
I used to stay with my uncle, who really introduced me to classical music, because I didn't have classical music at my home at all. My parents were keen ballroom dancers, so they would listen to that kind of music, all ballroom kind of music and so on. But they didn't really have classical music on. But my uncle did, and I would stay with my uncle quite regularly as a boy, and he had a pile of records, including all the classics, mainly Tchaikovsky and Beethoven and so on. And so I was introduced to classical music through that route by hearing, well, I think it was Swan Lake, it was the one. I mean, I've never forgotten hearing that for the first time. As a 12, 13-year-old boy, it was sensational. It was just, I've never heard music like this. I've never heard an orchestra before. And it was just amazing. And so, of course, I wanted to listen to everything he had there, but also to mix things as well. It wasn't very long before I started to explore other composers because I just lapped it all up. I mean, I wanted to find out as much as I could. So I was introduced to Vaughan Williams, of course. There was English music, and Elgar, very much hearing some of their work. French music, particularly, I started to listen to Ravel, Debussy. Then later, Shostakovich came into my life. I hadn't come across him before. So from Tchaikovsky, I then moved to some later Russian composers, particularly Shostakovich, who I just thought was amazing. Right, I'm just putting some of the finishing touches to this song I've been working on for the last few weeks.
Have you finished all the scoring of it?
Well, yeah, I'm at the polishing stage, I think, with this. But there's still one or two little corners that I need to attend to. But it's pretty well there, I think.
Have you sorted out that transition with all those changing chords, slow changing chord bits?
I think so. I think that works quite well now. That's a very good question. How did it all begin? Well, there's a long evolution, in a sense, to that point in terms of writing art song, because it started at the age of 19, setting a poem by Harold Monroe called Midnight Lamentation. It was my first attempt at writing a song. And these words, which I had discovered, I loved poetry from a very early age. And in fact, throughout, when I was a church organist and choir master for at least 4 years, let's say. And during the sermons, I would smuggle in some poetry. I mean, I know that sounds very odd, but I loved poetry or reading poetry, and this was because I could just put it down. And there was a screen behind the organ, so no one could see what I was doing. So when the sermon was going on, I'd read through anthologies, and I still have these little anthologies. And this one, edited by Cecil Day Lewis, this poem just jumped off the page at me, and I found it so powerful. The narrative was so sad, poignant about what happens when in a long-term relationship one dies, and will you ever see them again? And for someone at the age of 19, I was terribly emotional, and it just dawned on me that this is what could happen. It started off very well. This poem has many stanzas, maybe, I can't remember, maybe 6 or 7. And so the first stanza went extremely well. I got my melody going, my harmony, and the whole thing just happened instantly. It just flooded out. There's the first stanza. But then as I tried to use my music for the second stanza, it wasn't working, because Munro's poem, the meter and the prosody started to alter subtly. So I just couldn't put the music to the words. And I thought, this is not going well. And so I thought, I know, I'll just alter the words. So I started to alter the words to fit the music, and I kept doing this throughout. And of course, I didn't set all the verses either, all the stanzas. So I finished it, and I was very pleased with it. I thought it was a good attempt, and I thought, well, I'll have a go again. Let's set another poem. But then I came up with the same problem, that somehow the music that I'd written, that inspired the opening of the song, wouldn't fit the rest of the poem, because clearly I was doing it the wrong way. That's not the way you set words. But I didn't realise that, being a novice and not quite, so I just thought, well, it's not working, so forget that. So I never wrote another song for another 10 years. So I was writing piano music, chamber, or whatever it happens to be, until I got to around 1990, when I discovered Finzi's songs and started to examine those and enjoy those, and thought to myself, how's he doing it? How's he managed? How's he mastered this? And I could immediately, it was obvious, that everything comes from the words.
How do you feel about having to ask Jonathan to take those words out?
Well, it was some trepidation, I must say. One remembers Vaughan Williams and Houseman and the problems they had when Houseman had on Wenlock Edge and almost had a heart attack when he found that Vormuser cut those lines out of his poem. So yes, one's always a bit concerned because this is a wonderful poem, and although I've set every line in this poem musically, I felt that this constant repetition of this line, beginning at the end, we close the gate. I felt structurally as a song it would be better without those lines, and so that's why I asked him whether I could remove them. And he was very flexible and very nice about it. Said, "Of course, that's a poem. This is a song."
Collaborating with Ian on having my poem set to music was quite unusual for me as an artist. Poets probably are controllers to some extent. We tend to sit and write and offer our poems to other people, but suddenly there was another artist of a different discipline taking a serious interest in something I'd written, and I had no sense that the poem I'd written would do anything. Actually, I mean, I suppose it has been published in a literary magazine, but beyond that, I didn't expect it to have any further life. And then suddenly there was another artist saying, "I'm going to take this and make something else of it." So there was initial shock, and I have to say, a great deal of pleasure and anticipation, because I've spent the last 10 years, I suppose, possibly slightly less, since I've really come to listening to art song through the work of Ian and other artists, being interested in how a poem can be reimagined through music.
This is the first time, to my knowledge, you've ever had to remove.
Well, no, I have done it before, but the difference now is, of course, the poet's still alive.
Yes, that makes a difference, yeah.
I think it does. I mean, I can actually ask him whether he would allow me to do that, and he did, which has been wonderful. I should say straight away, he's not allowed in the music room when I'm composing. This composing for me is a solitary occupation. I don't like anyone in the room. I wouldn't have anyone even nearby if possible. I usually banish him upstairs. Obviously, later in the process, Graham is involved, of course, but not the initial compositional process. That's me here in this room, facing a blank piece of paper, and it's the hardest thing of all, to start. Where do you start? How do you start? Well, there are all sorts of things going on in your head at this moment, depending on what you're writing. And with the song, obviously, you've got the words in front of you, so that's a great help. If you haven't got words and you're writing an abstract work, of course, that's very difficult. How that happens, you sit and wait, I suppose. I allow my emotions to. I engage with the text, for example. I'm reading it through, and usually, obviously, I've already chosen this poem, so that it must be speaking to me. And so I sit there, and I particularly the opening lines, because that's where it all starts. The melodic train is set. The melody starts off, you hope, and with the words, the vocal narrative is unfolding. And if that happens, and it seems to be working for me, I do it together with the harmony. I don't separate these. I don't write a melody out and then harmonize it. It all comes together, rhythm, melody, everything. So the whole thing starts to unfold, and I can tell instantly whether this is going to be I could develop this in some way. So I let this flow as fast, and I write it down very quickly, and it's usually gibberish. You wouldn't make Beethoven look positively, absolutely clear. But for me, it's just a process of getting as much down as I can before things slow down, before, for want of a better word, inspiration fails. Because then the intellect takes over. Which it must do. And so that's really where it begins, I would say, the process.
There's no question that Ian's love of poetry, of the written word generally, but particularly of poetry, the distilled essence that involves, it's very profound and informs his setting. There's no question about that. Well, what I admire is that he doesn't take the easy option, which is to do Emily Dickinson, which is so distilled that it makes it possible to do all sorts of things. He chooses poems that are really quite layered and complex. And he's done stuff by Andrew Motion, for heaven's sake. How do you find room in that sort of text to make sure that your musical contribution is adding to the argument? That is very difficult, and I don't know anybody who's done that more successfully than Ian. As composers, we seek a spare quality to the language we're trying to set, because that allows us room to express ourselves or create an argument that enhances the word on the page. But he's quite fearless, Ian. And I also admire the range of material he does. I was going to say that he hasn't done a Houseman like the rest of us, but I noticed that he has, but he hasn't done it as much as the rest of us.
Oh, ist das der Szene, with the handcuffs on his wrists.
I think he understands the piano very well. He knows the sonorities he wants to get. Like all great song writers, the sonority of the piano, and then when it's very dry and brittle, he can do that as well. So yes, it's exciting music to play.
For the power of his hand, 'tis a shame to human nature.
Ian's music is. It's funny. We were just chatting, and he was saying tunes aren't dead, or melody isn't dead. And that's such a wonderful thing to hear nowadays, because there seems to be this tendency to assume that if a modern composer writes tunes, writes easily memorable melodies, that somehow it doesn't fit in today's art song, and so singing Ian's music really is like a breath of fresh air. It's, yes, these tunes, the melodies are memorable, but he always voices them perfectly, regardless of what instrument, or whether it's for voice or string quartet or piano or whatever. It just is always voiced and weighted beautifully.
Now 'tis open for his fingers, and the treadmill for his feet, and the rock and the water.
I was 16 years of age. We had in our house a room over the garage, a very large room, which had a snooker table. My father bought me a snooker table at some point because I liked the idea of trying to play snooker. And so we had the snooker table and I was playing it. And always in the corner of the room was a radio. And I had Radio 3 on all the time. And I remember very, very strongly that I was just playing as I would do. And there was something on in the background. I didn't really take any notice of it until all of a sudden there was a crash. And a scream of high strings rushing around. And I just stopped in my tracks. I thought, what's this? And so I sat and started to listen. And then after all this pandemonium stopped, it was an amazing sound. We got a slow section, a second subject came in. And I'd never heard anything so beautiful in my life. I was in tears, I was crying. I can even remember it now. It was just one of those great emotional experiences that you never forget. And I thought, who could have written such deep, meaningful music? I mean, it was just incredible. I'd been moved by music to some extent, of course, Tchaikovsky and so on, but this moved me to tears. And music hadn't done that to me till that point. And I thought, so what is this? So we carry on. It's quite a long piece of music. And eventually, of course, the announcer said, this is Gustav Mahler's First Symphony. That was the last movement. And I thought, who's Gustav Mahler? Never heard of him. I mean, Mahler, as I said, has been so important in my life, and no more important than the way Graham and I met, through Mahler. It was quite amazing, really. We met at a party after a church service.
There was a piano upstairs, and I rushed upstairs and started to play the Chopin Revolutionary Study. I was having great fun, and I came down, and on the sofa was the gentleman, Mr. Venables, and I sat down. He said, was that you playing the Chopin Revolutionary Study? And I said, yes, it was. He said, it's very good. I said, oh, left hand's a bit dodgy in places, I said. But who cares at this time of night? It was getting on a little bit late, sort of, I don't know, 9:30, 10 or something. And we started to talk.
And of course, he was a musician. I started asking him about his likes. He loved Richard Strauss.
I think Ian might have said, is Chopin your favourite composer? And I said, oh, no, Chopin isn't. I think Chopin is just a god. But Mahler is my favourite composer.
And I said, oh, well, what Mahler symphonies do you like?
I said, I have two, actually. It's the 9th Symphony and the 10th Symphony.
And I thought, oh, those are my favourite symphonies.
He said, do you have a favourite movement in Mahler? I said, yes. There's two again. I've got the first movement of the 9th and the final movement of the 10th. He went, oh, right. Do you have a favourite moment in Mahler? And I said, well, of course, yes. Doesn't everyone? And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's the flute theme from the beginning of the 5th movement of the 10th Symphony.
I thought, wow. I mean, that was just incredible. Not only is he telling me he loves Mahler, but he's rattling off all those important aspects of Mahler that I myself was drawn to. And then to top it with that flute solo, I thought, well, he's special.
Ian realised that he wanted to see me again, so we met up. And here we are 40 years later, still talking about Mahler 10. Which is rather nice, actually.
The first time I encountered Ian Venables' music was when I was working with a pianist called Mark Bebbington. We were planning a recital of songs by John Joubert and a few other English composers, and he recommended Ian's music to me. So I hadn't actually heard it, but I went straight to the score, and I found, first of all, I was attracted to the poems, and then the music was something really, really special. It was a revelation.
Is very unusual in that it's punctuated by two very significant, if you like, piano cadenzas. And to me, this is Ian in a slightly monolithic voice. It's rather like going on a fantastic country outing and suddenly coming up across Stonehenge. And to me, these are interludes that almost speak with the authority of the voice of God. They're absolutely trenchant, and Ian is very clear in what he has to say. Whereas emotionally, There's always a degree of ambivalence elsewhere in this movement, but here, very forthright. Now we break into it here.
My sabbatical came about because the school, the headmaster of the school, new headmaster, wanted to recognise the long service of teachers at the school.
He came home and said that this had happened, and I said, "Ooh, that's a good idea." And he said, I think he said, "Do you think I should apply for one?" And I said, "Of course, you must apply for one."
But here was a moment where I thought to myself, I just want to go somewhere where I can compose, where I can be a composer. I got on the plane and I was welcomed at the other end in Boston, and I had a fantastic time there. I was introduced to so many other people. I mean, I went to see Ned Rorem in New York. In fact, that was a very, very amusing conversation that we had, because I'd already sent him a CD of my first CD of songs, because he was America's greatest song composer, and I just wondered whether he'd be interested in hearing my music. And so I'd sent it to the Curtis Institute, which is where he was teaching. But he'd retired, I hadn't realised that. So when the phone rang one day in Boston, in this house I was staying in, it was kind of, can I speak to Ian Venables? And I said, well, yeah, Ian Venables speaking. This is Ned Rorem. Oh, gosh, Ned Rorem, wow, thank you for ringing. He said, oh, I've just received your CD that was sent on from the Curtis Institute. I don't teach there anymore. I have listened to the songs. I like them very much. Of course, that was my moment to think, well, could I meet you, Mr. Rorem? So I went, I got myself on a train and went to I rang him up and he said, yes, come. So I went to his apartment. He had an English tea all set up, and we had a 2 or 3 hours conversation, a wonderful time with him, and we got on very well.
However, he then came home.
When I arrived back, I was still on my sabbatical, and I'd probably eaten too much over in Boston, and I suddenly thought, I think I need to be a bit fitter. So I joined a gym. And I was just coming up to my 50th birthday. This is probably not a good idea, but anyway, I decided I needed to get fit. So I went to this gym, and I quite liked the rowing machine. It seemed a relatively easy aerobic kind of exercise, so I would use the rowing machine. Perhaps the settings were wrong, I don't know, perhaps I had done too much, but the point was that I started to use this rowing machine, and at some point I suddenly felt dizzy and strange. Of course, I didn't know I was having a stroke. That was what was going on.
Very difficult indeed. For him particularly, of course, but it's always horrible for the partner who feels impotent in that situation.
One of the things that I wanted to do as soon as I was able was to write music. I needed somehow to express my gratitude to Graham, and just to try to deal with the emotional trauma that I've just been through. And so at the first opportunity we went out, as we do. I always look for poetry books in bookshops, and we went to Pershore, and sure enough I found this wonderful little book of sonnets by Jean Despond, sonnets of love and death. And this, of course, it's love that was what I was looking for. And it didn't take me long. Sonnet 11, which explains what it means to be in love. Graham was rather surprised by it, I have to say, and he'll probably tell you so.
Now, I don't know whether that was me still in a bit of shock and not coping, but it seemed so off-beam for Ian. It seemed so odd what he was doing musically.
I don't know I was breaking new ground, but certainly it was coming out in an odd way, that the way I was writing it seemed strange to him. It seemed perfectly fine to me. It was what I wanted to say, and because it builds up to this immense climax, and but it is on the most important line, and so it gets louder and louder. It's almost kind of a minimalist piano accompaniment, and then it fades out. It gets quieter and quieter.
The end of this song repeats a phrase so many times, from piano to treble forte. That's extremely loud, and it was like an insistent, constant repetition, which he doesn't do. And I thought, oh my God, what's he doing? And the middle section of this song is unbelievably intoxicating. It is so heady and so affirmatively positive, but with incredible harmonies in it. That song was the one that people were just utterly blown away by, because it was both of those things, intoxicating and also relentless in its insistence on love, and that loving me was what kept him alive. Sorry? What? That kept him going.
More and more colour. Yes. Builds up. And the modulation.
Well, the first time I came across Ian and his music was out of sheer accident and coincidence. I was just listening to Dutch radio, classical radio, and then all of a sudden one piece really struck me. It was really something that struck a chord in me. And I thought, who is this? Who wrote this piece?
Spirit
Dit was het eerste deel van de liedcyclus The Song of the Severn, genaamd aan Malvern Hill van de Britse componist Ian Venables.
I was really fascinated by him, and I ordered the score and sort of other pieces he wrote, and then received the score, and I was leafing through it. I was studying it, playing it a little bit.
I got this email from Vincent.
I said, oh, really? I said, what does he want? Anyway, he said, oh. And then he read the email out.
He explained that he had heard my song cycle, The Song of the Seven. He said he loved the music, and that he felt it could be orchestrated. He felt that it had that possibility, and that he took it upon himself to do just that. And he wrote to tell me that he'd orchestrated this piece. He was very apologetic, saying, I hope that you don't mind, I could quite understand, you might be upset by receiving such an email as this.
And I went, oh God, not another one. Ian said, well, he's provided the audio. So I said, well, why don't we listen to it?
We sat in here and we played it through.
And I said, wow, that is really good. That is really, really good.
And as it was unfolding, I began to realise that this was a wonderful, wonderful scoring orchestration of the piece.
And then the very next day I got a very gentle, very kind email from Ian and said, oh, I'm very surprised that you took that piece.
I had very little to say about his scoring because it was so wonderful. But, of course, the proof of the pudding is actually hearing it live.
that he sings the easy summers of the lesser light.
I think that the moment one leaves the house and one is off to the concert, you're starting to get excited, but also nervous. I'm quite nervous generally to go to any of my performances. I get extremely anxious about it, partly because one just hopes it's going to go well.
Be better. We were just looking at the hills and
Yes.
looking at beautiful hills, beautiful building, beautiful music, beautiful people. What more could we ask for?
Indeed.
It's overwhelming, actually. Pinch me. It's a dream.
Well, we arrive at the Abbey on the great day. Graham is marching on ahead, as he will. In fact, he seems much more excited than I am, in a sense.
I think one entering a building such as Great Malvern Priory, the palpable history, the connections, the topography where it is, the way it's presented as a building, its beauty, it's difficult not to feel humbled by that place.
My proposal to Ian that he makes a requiem of the introit was first met with an emphatic no, and my reaction to that was simply not to accept it. This is what I wanted him to do. Persuasive, Ian has described me as I think I'm more persistent than persuasive, because I just kept on at him to do it. But I don't think it would have been me alone that could have caused that. I think Graham thought it was a good idea. And of course there was money in it, so that's always a nice thing to have. I just think that once people like Adrian Partington and the various critics, Quinn, Dunnett, had heard some of it, they really did take on a lot of the work of persuading Ian to carry on with it.
Ian gets to the point, I think, where when he's listening to a rehearsal, he's interested in the overall effect.
Graham is terribly focused. His musicality is second to none, and he will hear every detail. He's just amazing.
I've got the score and I'm the detail merchant, and I'm sort of sitting there wondering whether the oboe's B flat is absolutely in tune, and that's good in a way. I think I want to make sure that I know where, if something does go wrong or there is an issue, it can be dealt with very, very quickly. And so I've like a bit of a Rottweiler on the score with my pencil, and I'm marking things, and then Ian and I'll discuss it. And if he says, well, it's not too bad really, is it? Or it seemed to work, then we'll just get on with it. But that's why I'm there. I'm the kind of, I'm like a musical bat. So, the ears are really working that day.
I know that Ian has, and Graham, they've both said that Ian's compositions are, in a sense, their children.
Graham is nanny to Ian's work, or something like that, I suppose. And the child does need a lot of looking after, taking care of. It needs, perhaps less so now, but it certainly needs some input with the people rehearsing it.
Graham, having invested so much of his energy into realising Ian's works, Graham is often the person who spots particular musical details that could be expanded upon, or indeed in many cases elongated.
Every time there's a new work in the composing, it's like the maternity period, and then when the piece is completed and it's performed, this is the birth.
I can only, think that Graham would have been there at all those junctures when things got difficult to just ease things and calm things. For myself, having, been married for umpteen years, you do rely on another person. It's just someone you can sound off. And I think Ian and Graham have obviously made a great partnership together.
Ian Venables, here we are.
Beautiful, thank you.
Can I just check something?
Yes.
It looks like an editorial, but it could be, I'm wrong. This looks like it should be bass clef.
I never looked at a score.
Well, so when a composer is writing for a large force like an orchestra, inevitably you have a myriad of different techniques and technical issues that each instrument presents. And it's the composer's job to make sure that they know exactly how that instrument works.
Because then I swap the hands.
Oh,
if it's
yeah.
not, it's 48 in the last one.
No, it must be. Actually, I haven't got this is my own score here. Perhaps the novella. Graham, have you got the novella score? I just want to check this.
I haven't got the novella. What's the matter with
Okay,
it?
it looks like it might be in the
I
bass.
think it might be an editorial thing.
Yeah, it may.
Shouldn't it on the
48.
bass?
Hang on a minute. Just occasionally, and the harp is legendary for causing problems for composers, just occasionally there can be an issue which can create confusion, and in that instance it was the harp having to cross hands in an unusual manner. I think the lady also wanted clarification that she was reading the correct clef as well. In other words, was it in a different part of the harp rather than where she was playing it?
No. Is it?
Oh, so my left hand should be above my right. Okay.
Is that all
that's
right?
Absolutely fine. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, no,
so I
that's
swap
very-
these around.
Yes, I mean, I
yes.
suspect probably
Yes.
whatever is facilitates you the easiest. I mean,
Yeah.
Is that how they presented that?
no, it's how you wrote it, darling.
Oh, right, it's my fault then.
So it's
It's always the composer's
Is it a
fault.
is it a
Yeah,
problem?
so
Is it? Should it be the other way
not
around?
at all. I just have to know because it made total sense
Yes.
Yes.
as well if that's the bass clef because normally we
Of
don't
course,
have the
yes,
left
yes,
hand
no,
over the
that-
right like that.
I see.
Because it's the
Okay.
same for the piano.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, so
I'm very
like
sorry,
left and right.
I don't
You
play the
wouldn't
harp.
you wouldn't do that. You don't do that in the harp.
Not really. I wouldn't
really.
like that.
Oh,
If we're crossing for arpeggios and things, of course.
Of course, yeah, but
if
not
it's-
not at the same
no.
time. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
You're
Oh.
very welcome.
In the end,
So,
it
yeah,
was just a
that's
question of presentation that wasn't quite right. The notes were all correct, but there were some differences between various scores. So that was an important moment. Unfortunately, that wasn't, we didn't have the first violinist doing the same, or the cellist, or whatever. So that was the one worry was taken out of the equation because we knew that the parts and the score worked very well. But it is always a worrying moment for me when something is being performed for the first time.
It's lovely to have a composer in the performance. Even before, sometimes, he would come into a rehearsal, and that was lovely because it was very reassuring.
There was a great sense of anticipation in the choir. We've been working very hard on this piece, and when the day comes, everyone is really wanting it to be the best it possibly can.
Looking forward to this.
Anybody who writes anything has to put a lot of work into getting it performed. Persuading people to do it is, 9/10 of the work. And Ian and Graham, you can see them hard at work at each of the performances, thanking people who've made it happen, looking for people who make the next one happen. And that's an awful lot of curating, taking care of the infant work.
Just indulge me slightly, because no one has ever just sat into that chord. Just slightly, because they tend to go, there's such a beautiful harmonic change. And I thought, well, I'll better not write a writ in there, because we know what will happen. It'll be 3 hours later. We'll get the chord. But just if you wouldn't indulge me just on as we just ever so slightly as we sit into that chord.
Oh, fine.
Is that all right?
Absolutely fine.
Otherwise, I won't interfere.
No, okay.
What's on your mind? Any concerns?
No, not really, as long as the parts are correct. Because, of course, they haven't been used before. So they've been published by Novellos. And so we used different parts in November last year. So I just want to make sure that the parts are okay, and I'm sure they will be.
We got through the rehearsal, which went very well. It was being recorded, so there's a lot of kit and gear, and it all looked quite, exciting. And then the building started to fill with what ended up being a sellout audience, which was great. And so, of course, lots of people wanting to speak with Ian beforehand, just to let him know that they were there. And so many people came from all parts of the country to be there for this occasion.
Hello, darling.
It's a very well-trodden path. A lot of people have composed requiem masses, and it's always difficult for a modern composer not to be influenced by what's gone before and end up falling into, by accident, a sort of form of pastiche. So somehow you've got to find your individual voice, or he had to, for something he didn't really want to write, which is something he didn't feel, particularly strongly about in religious terms, but had to come to through the words. And that was quite a journey, I think, for him.
clearly they were enjoying this performance. I couldn't expect more, and to get a standing ovation is just incredible, really, for people to respond that way. It shows they really did understand and enjoy the work.
There was total euphoria, really, with people greeting Ian and Graham and congratulating him on this magnificent work.
I'll see you on Saturday. Thank you so much for coming.
It's a really wonderful piece. That is going to be a great success.
Well, I found meeting everyone at the end quite overwhelming.
Congratulations, wonderful work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, you helped make it happen. This is the man, Patrick and Kate. They commissioned the orchestration of that work. So I have you to thank for that, really.
It really is a magnificent work. And it was extremely moving to see, and I'm getting emotional now, even talking about it. Apologies. But it's wonderful to see, because that's what music is and does to people. And that Ian does so in such a sort of a quiet and understated and very modest way.
Ian's music is, how should I put it, small but perfectly formed. And he's a brilliant composer of chamber music, of song. His string quartet, I think, is an absolute masterpiece. But everything I hear by Ian makes me say, you obviously have the capacity to write really serious, big music. You know, we have a tradition in this country going back really to Parry and Stanford in the 1880s and 1890s, of churning out some really world-class symphonies. Most of the best symphonies written in the 20th century were by English composers. Now, I think that's a baton that Ian needs to pick up. And I think his only enemy in doing this is his own innate modesty. And some of us as his friends, I think, have got to sit in a darkened room with him and shake him until he agrees to start writing a symphony, because I know if he writes one, he'll write 4 or 5, and they will all be magnificent.
Ian just seems to be one of the most sort of generous spirited, kind people, and he seems like such a lovely person, so I just wish him all the best and good health, to him and Graham as well.
Just carry on basically doing what you're doing. It's been an absolute delight to see, to hear and to witness all that you've accomplished together. And I know that the relationship exists particularly well because of the two of you, Ian and Graham, together.
If Ian were here, I'd tell him just how much he's enriched my life, his music and knowing him, and helped me find a new sense of purpose later in my life. But I'd tell him not to give up, because his music is the kind of music that encourages people and gives them help. What was it, the fabulous saying of Nietzsche's, that without music life would be a mistake. I think, you know, Ian is capable of writing the kind of music that reminds you that life is not a mistake. And for that reason, you must keep going for as long as you possibly can, Ian, because we need it.
And let us drink our fill before we die. Still the breeze
you.